Today is April 12th, and this is the 2016 Facilities Geospatial Technology Showcase. The second annual webinar series is hosted by the Campus Facilities Technology Association and organized by the University of Kentucky. I'm Lauren Weaver, and thank you all for joining us today. Today's webinar is being recorded. The recording will be made available on the CFTA website following this presentation. The presentation itself is estimated to run for about 45 minutes, with the remaining time open for Q&A. Please send any questions you have during the presentation using the questions dialog box or following as well. Your question will be added to the queue and answered at the end as time allows. I'd like to extend a very big thank you to today's presenter, Elizabeth Getz, CAD and GIS technician. She joins us today to discuss the integration of various database resources at her university, including GIS, for redundancy prevention and transparency. Elizabeth, thank you for joining us today. The webinar is yours.
Thank you, Lauren. Hi, everybody. I'm Liz Getz. I am actually now a GIS analyst with the University of Colorado Boulder. I have been with the Facilities CAD GIS office for about 2 years now, and before that for 2 years as a work study. We're managing about 363 buildings, both on and off campus, and we have about 300 acres on our main campus. Our office is actually a branch of facilities management underneath planning, design, and construction. As such, we are separate from our main campus Office of Information Technology. This is an interesting dynamic for us since we are sort of an independent group on campus. And from there, I'm actually going to exit off my main slide here and pull up. This is a diagram of basically our server configuration, just to kind of get you guys up to speed on what we're doing. We're running Munsis GIS, that is provided by the company OpenSpatial. It is a GIS application that runs on an Oracle server, and the user interface actually comes through AutoCAD Map. So it floats on top of AutoCAD Map and provides the graphic interface for our GIS database. We are not using any Esri GIS at the moment, although we might in the future mess with some of their web side stuff. But at the moment, we are only doing Munsis GIS. We're also using their online web client called Enlighten, and we are publishing to that web client via Map Guide. We're also using FAMIS as our work tracking database and as our space management database, and we are accessing that through FAMIS CAD. And we're using Meridian Document Management Systems as our document management, and we are accessing that through Power User desktop client and through the web client. And we are publishing documents to that, both from our CAD side and from our project side. So that's a quick overview of our system. Now we are also pulling all of this information from these 3 databases together into our Enlighten web client. And that's really what I'm going to focus on today, is how we got these 3 big database systems to work together. I'm going to jump right into our Enlighten web map, and I'm going to just do a refresh to make sure everything is connected and we've got a live connection. So this is Enlighten. This is our campus GIS web map. You can see here we've got a lot of stuff on this map. Let me zoom in on our main campus here. So this is the main campus of the University of Colorado Boulder. And you'll see if I mouse over one of these buildings, I'm getting a little pop-up, a tooltip. This tooltip looks very simple. We're looking at building number, building code, building name, address, year built, and building status. None of this information, except for the geometry of that building footprint, exists in our GIS database. We're batching all of that information from our FAMIS Space Management Database into the GIS, and then doing a join with our building footprints to get this data into the GIS. This is really great for us. If any of you have ever used FAMIS, it does no graphic interface, and it's really hard to quickly get this kind of information. You have to look at 2 or 3 different screens in FAMIS. So this is really great for us because you can very quickly find out basic information, such as the year built on any building on campus, just by hovering your mouse over the map. Down here in the bottom of this tooltip, we also have these Meridian links. Now, Meridian, again, is our document management system. We've created a link here in the tooltip. If I click this link, it's going to launch our Meridian web client and do a search for the building that I specified. And it just came back with 1,487 documents related to the IMIG music building. This is really powerful. Very quickly do a search and find every document related to a building. From here, we could then filter it down by discipline and say we only want to see architectural and hit search. And now we're down to 300. And you can continue filtering this down until you find what you're looking for. We can also, from this link, quickly go to our building floor plans. And I'm going to grab that. And it's going to do the same thing. It's actually populating this hyperlink up here. And all we've done is tell it to fill in the end of this hyperlink with data from, actually from the FAMIS data through the GIS into this hyperlink. So we're telling it to search for building 334 and building subclass equals base, which is our base floor plans. And from here, we can open one of these up, and there's the floor plan for our music building. This has been a great tool for us to quickly disseminate information to other groups on campus and to let people know what data that we have that they can look at, because so many people just aren't familiar with our database systems, or they're familiar with one of them, but not all 3 of them. And so this tool has really been a huge jump for us as far as awareness of what you can find for pretty much anything on campus that we've published so far. We can also do some fun things. You'll see these little green cameras all over campus. And if I mouse over one of these, and I'm actually going to go up to this one and mouse over it, you can see we can put pictures on our map. And this happened last year. This is our new student, the bear, was hanging out in a tree on campus one morning. So we can do fun things like link pictures to objects on the map. But we can also do practical things. And I'm going to turn on our steam pipes here. There's our steam pipelines on campus. And now if I mouse over one of these valves, we can put a picture on that valve. And that way, when our shops guys go out looking for a particular valve, they know exactly what they're looking for in the field. This was a little bit of a process to get pictures on here. Actually, in our data table, what we have is the node ID for that valve equals T1S-cond for condensate -2. That's the valve number. So what we did is actually take a whole set of pictures that the steam shop guys took, and every single picture's file name is the valve number. So then we can quickly populate a search for every single valve to go find the picture that goes with that valve. Again, really powerful tool. So I should mention too that this web map has been up for about a year, and in that year we've done considerable build out, and a lot of this linking actually happened about 6 months in. So, but we went from pretty much no web presence to a working web map in the space of about a month, with full implementation and build out of all of our base layers here. All right. So I'm going to show you guys one of our latest projects. This is what we call the cone zone map. And as far as campus history goes, we actually have a whole website called the Cone Zone, whose purpose is to publish construction updates and closures for the whole campus. Traditionally, the Cone Zone has published a single PDF map showing campus closures, and it has published a list with that web map with the description of what all those closures include. And typically, we don't publish anything on the Cone Zone that'll be closed for less than a month, simply because the turnover rate is so quick with small projects that by the time we put it on the map, it's time to take it off the map, unless it's going to be closed for 3 to 4 weeks or more. So let me turn on our Cone Zone map, and we're going to get a lot of data here. This might take a second because it's loading live from our server. So what we're looking at now is our summer construction map. So we're looking at all these buildings that have this little brick pattern on it. Those are buildings that all have construction in them going on currently, according to our FAMIS work database. So if I mouse over, let's pick the library here. If I mouse over our library, you can quickly see that there are 6 active projects in that building. It's listing the 6 work order numbers, and it's listing the 6 project managers in order. Now, if we wanted more detail, say you're a project manager that has a project in this building and you're trying to figure out who else is working in this building, or you're a building manager trying to figure out what project manager's projects will be happening in your building. You can select that building and then launch this little More Info tool, the Advanced Form tool. And when we get our pop-up going here, it's giving us a list up here at the top of those 6 projects, and that includes a description of the project manager, phone number, email, their status of their project, their construction start dates, and their construction end dates. And down here at the bottom in this area, we're actually getting a more complete look at that project, including design start, construction start, and substantial completion start. So if we click on any one of these, that information at the bottom will change. This is also a good reminder for our project managers that they need to populate those dates, because everyone now can see each other's project dates and can check in and say, hey, why didn't you put a date on this project? We've had a little bit of that happen so far, and as more project managers start to use the tool, I think we'll have more checking in between each group. I'm going to go ahead and turn off our buildings with projects and get those out of the way. And you'll notice that there's also a lot of different colored lines going on this map. If we mouse over one of those, we'll get a little pop-up, and we'll notice that that purple line is the orientation route that they're going to take new students on. It's what we call the Buffalo Trail for Ralphie the Buffalo, who's our mascot. So they take students really all over campus for orientation. We'll get those out of the way. And the blue routes are our campus tour routes. So they're bringing parents and prospective students on these tours. This is very important to us that we are aware of these tour routes during construction season, because we don't want to be routing tour groups through construction or vice versa, routing trucks through the tour route, because they will be bringing lots of traffic through campus. And you'll notice here, actually, we do have a tour route going right by a construction area, and this will be rerouted before that construction starts, so that we're not bringing parents right by this big construction zone. And we'll get that one out of the way. We have another one too. This is our science discovery route, and we'll be bringing kids, elementary school to middle school kids, to campus for science discovery classes and workshops during the summer. And again, we want to make sure that they're routing away from construction, especially during the height of construction in the summer season. So let's just turn off the routes. We'll get those out of the way. And you'll see that we also have these big green circles. The green circles are science discovery areas, and the blue circles are another event on campus that is the Boulder. And we mark these just so that our construction people are aware that these are going on. It's something to keep in the back of your brain. And we will be adding more as more people come forward with more information on those. So now we're down to just our site projects. These can be much more specific because these are referencing just one single project. Now if I mouse over this one, we're getting a pop-up here. This data is coming from our FAMIS work management database. We're looking at just the project number and the impacts that that project manager has given us. I'm going to switch my layer here. Now we're color coding those projects based on their status in our FAMIS database, with green being in substantial completion, which is this one over here. And now you can see that we're actually getting even more data. Now we're getting the project description, the project manager, and their dates, again, coming live from FAMIS. The reason that the data is different between these two different layers is that different groups have different access to them. And this CP project areas layer is joining directly with the FAMIS data, whereas this other layer is not. And you can see that there's a lot more on this layer. And these may be upcoming projects that haven't had a project number or a project manager assigned to them yet. But we know they're going to happen this summer. And when they do get a project number assigned, they'll actually start showing up on this layer on their own. So if we mouse over this project over here, this is our big athletics project. You can see that there are a lot of impacts for this project. This area has been closed for a long time for the construction of our new athletics indoor practice facility. Yes, athletics indoor practice facility. I almost said recreation. Athletics would be very annoyed with me. So we're going to go ahead and launch into our document management system again from there. And now, if you're a project manager, you can see every document filed for that project so far, including all of our bid sheets, bid scores, the agenda for meeting minutes, et cetera, et cetera. All of the project management data is here right at one click off of the map. And again, that information is only available to people who have permission to view it. So say you are a building manager and you click on that project, you'll get different information than if you were the project manager viewing that project. So this has been one of our biggest integration projects because these project areas really are pulling data from all three areas. The geometry is drawn right in our GIS. The data is coming from our FAMIS work system, and then it's linking to all the documentation in our document management system. Should also mention that we've got some other stuff going on here, and I'm going to turn on our site plans layer, and we'll just turn on chilled water and drainage. So you can see we've got these big squares popping up on our campus map. These we've started publishing for our shops and grounds group, and I just turned on the grounds layer too. These are georeferenced plans, and if we mouse over this, we'll get a little pop-up telling us what document has been georeferenced there. And if we click on it, we can open it up in our document management system. There it is, and we'll open it up. And this is a site plan for our new chilled water distribution. And we'll go ahead and go back to the map. This is another way that we're trying to help especially our field staff find documents very quickly. Because, for instance, you might not know what project installed that water line or what project planted those trees next to, say, the Baker Hall building, but you know that it happened next to that building. This way, we can quickly lay these over the map, and you could find the planting plan next to Baker Hall without ever having to know what project planted those plants originally. And then our ground staff could come back and check, what did we plant? Did it all die out? Do we need to replace something? Should we plant something different? And all of this is at their fingertips. I should mention that this is in build out, so if we start zooming out, you'll see that most things are concentrated on main campus. And if we zoom out, we don't really have a lot of data referenced off of campus yet. But as we close projects, we are adding these georeference areas to our campus map so that these kinds of plans are more easily findable, both for us and for our grounds crews and for outdoor staff that need to quickly find these. All right. Let's see. So I'm actually going to launch another little PowerPoint here. Oh, where'd it go? PowerPoint. There we go. And I'm going to throw this up on the screen. And what we're looking at now is actually a quick screenshot of our building data inside of FAMIS. And if any of you have used FAMIS, you're probably familiar with this interface. You can really see the improvement between the FAMIS interface, where you're looking at 2 or 3 different screens to get this amount of information, which we can quickly populate into our web map. And if we go to our building floors, we've actually started doing this for rooms inside of buildings. And you can see that for this, we can actually pull in 3 or 4 screens worth of data into one quick pop-up on our map. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on, and I've lost my layer here, space planning. There we go. And we're going to look at rooms by category. Again, you can see our campus map just went black. Most of our buildings got grayed out. This is something that is currently in development. OpenSpatial, which provides our GIS database and interface and web map, has been working very closely with us to come up with a way to quickly populate our FAMIS CAD data from what are essentially CAD floor plans into our GIS database. And this is our initial stab at this. So we've only done about 3 or 4 buildings so far. And we plan to do more this summer and into the fall. You can see what we're looking at right now are all of the rooms inside this building. And you can see it's kind of a mishmash. We're looking at all 4 floors of this building at the same time. So in order to make this make sense, we've got a little filter set up here. And we'll select a filter. We'll do space planning, rooms by category, and tell it we want floor 1. There we go. Now we're just looking at the first floor of this building. And if we mouse over it, we're seeing that we can quickly get the information that this is on the first floor, the room number, the square footage, the department in that space, and the room category and room type. And let me just toggle this on and off for a moment. You can actually see that our building footprint for this building is actually a lot smaller than what the room footprint is. There's a lot of underground space in this building for parking garages. So once we have all this information built out, we'll actually be able to see even more of our underground infrastructure. We do already have our tunnels and utility spaces mapped, but we'll be able to see not only tunnels, but rooms underground. Let's go up here to another. This is our business building. And we've also got the rooms populated in here. And if I mouse over one of these, we'll see that we're actually getting library spaces. This is coming from our space management system, which is part of FAMIS. And we're pulling all this information, again, into our GIS and then publishing it to our web map. All right. And eventually, actually, we're going to use this data and work more with our custodial services and they'll be using the same geometry that we'll be getting from our building floor plans, and then they will be populating that to track floor material and condition so that they can plan to say, okay, we need this many people on this day with this many carpet cleaners, this many floor buffers, et cetera, to come in and clean this building. And they can quickly map that out and say, do a whole cluster of buildings and plan for 2 or 3 buildings at a time rather than just one. And currently, in order to do one building, they do a walkthrough and then rent the equipment to come in and clean a floor. So this would help them reduce time on doing walkthroughs of every single building every month when they do cleaning. I should also mention that our GIS is really sort of a squeaky wheel organization. We pretty much go where the demand is. So we have a lot of information for our grounds department, for instance, but less information when we start getting into capital assets and space planning, because until recently they were doing their own thing and they were like, well, we don't really need GIS. But as they've seen what we've done for the grounds crew who needed us immediately and who were really interested in participating from the beginning, a lot more organizations within our campus community have seen the value of the GIS and have contacted us to get involved rather than us chasing them down saying, hey, you could really use this. They've started coming to us saying, hey, we want this. And that's been huge for us. We've had sort of what I like to call the snowball effect, where for a long time we had tiny little GIS. We had one person correcting our base map, and we weren't really working with any other groups on campus. But as that so slowly expanded, person by person, group by group, now we've got a big snowball, and we're actually currently chasing the snowball a little bit down the hill because we have so much work that we're having a hard time keeping up with it, and we're bringing on more students and staff to help us manage our GIS now that we have so much involvement from the rest of campus. So Lauren, I think we're actually running a little bit fast. I think I talked a little bit fast, but let me go ahead and open it up to questions, and people can write in, and I'm happy to show the background of this or to jump into different layers, whatever people are interested in seeing.
Sure, sure. That's great. Well, thank you for sharing what you have done. It's also interesting to hear about where you'd like to take it moving forward. We always have those ambitions of now we've done this, what more can we do? So it's nice to hear about what you're thinking of planning in the future as well. So we will move into the Q&A portion at this time. If anybody has any questions they've not yet submitted, please feel free to go ahead and send them, and I will provide the questions as they come in. So first off, would you mind to speak a little bit more about system functionality and limitations of the various databases you're using, and going into like Muncis and Meridian and FAMIS as well? What limitations are you finding?
Well, so she mentioned with Muncis, that's an Oracle database. It's actually very flexible. In a lot of ways, it's similar to an Esri database. There are all the basic limitations of any GIS database. You have to have clean spatial data. For instance, as we've been migrating our room plans, our building floor plans into our GIS, we're actually finding a lot of geometry that's embedded in those old CAD files that won't migrate to our GIS just because, say, we have link lines between some geometry. Let me turn this space planning layer back on, and we'll zoom in on COBOL here. Let's see if I can find this space. I think it's on the second floor. Let's reset this and take a look at the second floor. We've just been working on this actually this week. Well, yeah, there we go. If we start looking at some of these spaces, for instance, this corridor space was actually, I think it was in 3 spaces. There's one in here. These guys, this room here has islands in it. You can see that this is all one space with islands in the middle of it. When we had this in our CAD file, this was a single polygon, And it would come around here. There would be a link line across, and it would wrap around and back. And same for the other island. So we're finding that we're having to spend some resources and effort actually cleaning our old CAD geometry in order to make it work in our GIS. And a lot of you who've done CAD to GIS, pretty much with most data, you have to do quite a bit of cleanup before your geometry will be ready to go back and forth. So like overlapping lines, duplicates, that kind of thing, very common in CAD files, especially old CAD files that have been around for 10, 20 years, start having just some junk geometry in them. So that's typical of pretty much every GIS. As far as other database limitations, I think we're very happy with the Munces database. We also access that through SQL Developer, and we can actually get into the back side of that database and make changes there. FAMIS database is really interesting. We're not a big fan of the user interface. Let me throw this PowerPoint back up on the screen. This is the user interface for FAMIS, and there's not a lot of access directly into the database. So if we're looking at our floor data, it's really tricky to enter data for tracking space in this database, and you have to change it one space at a time, which if we look at a building like our Center for Community or a business building that we were just looking at, we're talking about hundreds of spaces. And say a whole floor, we move a department out, we move a department in, you have to manually change every single one of those individually. It's very frustrating. That's one thing we've been talking to them about with our FAMIS reseller, basically, and there are, as far as we can tell, no plans to change that. We're not a fan of that. We're actually going to be migrating our space management system out of FAMIS and using Archibus. We're just looking at beginning implementation for that. We're probably a couple months out on really getting started with that. We're all really excited to see what that'll be like. So we'll be actually rolling a whole nother system in on top of our other database systems, simply to help us track space better. And with the Archibus system, we'll actually be able to link that to our PeopleSoft system, which is what we use for campus scheduling, that tracks who's in what classroom, who's in what office. It can get as detailed as you want to get. I'm not as familiar with the PeopleSoft side of it. That's pretty much our admissions and administration that runs that database. But we will be integrating that into our space sometime in the next year. We're really excited about that. And with the Meridian database, that's really interesting. I think we're pretty happy, especially with the web client side, is really user-friendly. We don't have a direct database access for this, at least not directly here in the CAD office. Our FMIS staff does have access to the back end of Meridian. And we've had it, gosh, coming up on 3 or 4 years now. We've got a pretty good build out. We're talking about 75,000 plus documents in our document management system, just from the CAD office, which we really got started as our document library, document management. So we migrated in 75,000 documents over about 3 years with student help. And then our project staff has just picked it up within the last year. And I think we have a lot of flexibility in customizing what we're using with this system. We've been very happy with it so far. I haven't really had any experience with any other document management systems. Since this one was really chosen before I was really a staff member here, I'm not really sure how that happened. But as far as the user goes, we've been pretty happy with it. Do you have any more questions?
We have a few questions actually following up from that question. So you just had mentioned that FAMIS was selected, or Meridian was selected rather, before your time here. And in regard to both of those systems, FAMIS and Meridian, how long were folks using those before the new integration?
Meridian, we probably used it for 2 years before we started integrating it with our GIS. We've had the system, gosh, it's got to be about 4 years now. FAMIS we've had for a lot longer, at least 10 years, maybe even longer than that. I'm not sure how old the system is. And it's really interesting. I'm going to turn on our grounds layer here. We've got a lot of stuff in grounds we haven't looked at. And this, again, we're actually tracking all of our plant beds and trees on campus. But you can see all these planted areas on campus. Before we had a GIS, someone had the idea to try to track these in FAMIS without a graphic interface. So they were, they invented a building called Building 900, and then they had different floors in that building, which were different zones on campus. And then within each zone, each plant bed was a room. Nobody ever maintained this. It was pretty much a data explosion. It was really rough. I think we still have some little pieces of it floating around in the FAMIS database. But it was really not a great way to track this kind of space, because if you can't visualize it, you don't really know what plant bed they're talking about. And we do have ID numbers on these, but a lot of times people working in the field would just say, well, the business field has a name, that's a big area. But if we're just talking about one of these little areas here, they'd just say, you know, the turf next to Reed Hall, or the flower beds in front of Hallett. They wouldn't say, you know, TF 119 is how we're tracking them in the FAMIS database. So I think one of the biggest drawbacks of the FAMIS database is that there's no graphic interface for tracking space. And there has been a few different attempts to make a graphic interface for that. We work closely with ACAD Plus and CAD 1, and ACAD Plus has published something called FAMIS CAD, which is a graphic interface for tracking rooms. And it basically runs similar to Munsis on top of AutoCAD and batches information off of polygons into our FAMIS database. But the problem with that is it's really easy to make duplicate spaces. And again, you have to edit them one by one because FAMIS won't accept a batch import. So you can't, say, grab all of the spaces in a building and change the department. You have to grab each one. And it's a very time-consuming process to migrate those spaces. The FAMIS CAD tool is a great improvement over doing it directly in FAMIS and looking at a floor plan and entering that data manually. But it's very time-consuming and very repetitive.
Okay. That is very helpful information. Yeah. So another question about FAMIS, while we're on that topic, do you have a plan for when 8IR2, and I don't know if I said that correctly, but when 8IR2 FAMIS is no longer supported?
You know, I don't really know. I think that's our FMIS that's managing that. And our group, technically, we're all under the umbrella of facilities management. And then we're, again, in another subgroup of planning, design, and construction. And there's also facilities IS, which is our IT services. And they're the ones who manage all of our FAMIS database. They manage FAMIS, they manage the Meridian database, except for the data input, which we actually manage. The GIS we manage completely on our side, except for a small amount of server stuff for publishing our web map. But all of our servers basically come through FMIS. And it's been an interesting process to kind of work with them to make sure we're all on the same page with what we're putting out and how we're linking things. But that means that we're not directly managing those other database systems. So I don't really know how we're going to deal with that.
Okay. Okay. How do you guys manage the, I guess, co-management of those systems? So your department is clearly using the databases, and you have a role in maintaining the information in there. That's correct, right?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay.
And actually, we publish a lot of information to all three databases. We have access to change things inside the Meridian database to an extent. Because it affects so many other users at this point, there's a committee and one person who does the editing for that. Because if we changed something on how we're tracking, say, closeout documents, we're tracking building record documents that say what was built during a project. If we changed something in how we're tracking those, how we're entering those, it would affect the 76,000 or so documents we have in there already, plus everything that gets put in after that. And with all the users in there, we try not to make changes to that part at this point. But our planning department is just picking up Meridian, and they'll have their own partition within the system. And so they have a lot of flexibility to design what they want for filing their own documents going forward. But once you have a certain volume of documents in there, you don't really want to mess with it. So we did a lot of testing early on and made a lot of changes over the first year before we really started populating that database.
Understood. Add a hyphen and see what happens, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
The FAMIS database, we all use that for our timesheets. Our project managers use that for project work tracking. And we use it for work order management and for tracking spaces at the moment. But we have no ability to customize the database itself, only the data within it. And because of that, we actually see a lot of really people misusing the database in some interesting ways. We've had it for long enough that people have tried to use it for things that it wasn't designed for instance, for tracking ground panels. And because it was never intended for that, it didn't actually work out very well. So we've seen a little bit of abuse of that database.
Okay. Okay, that's very helpful. We have some more specific questions as far as different components of information that you're showing in this web map and have shared with us. I'd like to go into those. Can you explain the process to show floor plan layouts on the map and how you're handling that? For example, are you georeferencing them or handling that in a different way?
Yeah, so what we do, and let me turn on our site plans layer here. Oh, I didn't actually add it to this because we're not using it that way. So what we do actually is we've XREF'd all of our building floor plans into a correct GIS campus map in CAD. So we XREF in all of those floor plans. Then we run what we call a geoscan boundary. That captures the edges of those CAD files. It's actually picking up the CAD file extents or limits and saving that as a georeferenced boundary into a polygon table in our database. From there, we actually open up the floor plan, and OpenSpatial has made some new custom tools. We're just getting ready to roll that out. So far, we've done this manually as a test, but we're just getting ready to roll out this new set of tools. You open the floor plan in CAD, and most of our floor plans, the lower left side of the floor plan is at 0, 0, and then they are just, in architectural units. So what we've done with that is then we turn on our space tracking layer, and we run this new command that we've just created, and that actually recognizes our space layer, which is called a space PPLN. And it recognizes those polygons from that building, and then it will check the FAMIS data attached to those objects in CAD against our georeference database to see if there's a georeference for that floor plan. And then it'll move those floors inside the CAD file to where they're supposed to be in real space. And then we can post them to our database. So it's been a little bit of a process to sort of invent the process for converting those.
Yeah.
But once we do it, it's actually a fairly quick process. We georeference all of the XREFs, which we already have in a map, and then we just open them up and publish them, essentially. When we publish, we need to go through and clean them, look for errors, bad geometry. But it has been a fairly smooth process so far. Still testing that, and we're hoping to roll it out soon.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, thank you. Now, regarding polylines and the addition of that information, and that would pertain to potentially site plans as well, how do individual project managers maintain the site construction boundaries map, or does your department do that, or how do you manage the incoming information from those different project managers to get it into your system?
So historically, we have been publishing a map as a PDF, and before that as a hard copy for at least 10 years. So what was happening with that is that we actually hired a consultant a few years ago, and his job was to go around to all the project managers every month, check up on all their projects, and update the map. So from there, we've actually come to kind of a hybrid system with the new web map, where he still interviews a certain number of project managers every month. But we have a lot of project managers actually sending us basically napkin sketches now every month rather than doing an interview process. It's a lot faster for them. It's a lot faster for us. But we do still have that consultant. He still talks to project managers every month. He collects all this data, and then I update the polygons on the map.
Okay.
We actually have invented a little thing using the red line feature of Enlighten that would allow the project managers to draw them directly on the map. But it's a little finicky, and so far we've had more trouble with it than we've had success. We're still working out the kinks in that, mostly because our project managers aren't as familiar with GIS, and because they can't delete anything once they put it in the map, they can only turn it off. So it's been a little bit of a learning curve for that.
Okay, thank you. We have a couple of questions about equipment. So how do you show the equipment in the system? And a couple of the questions are specific to perhaps air handling units and tracking spare parts, as well as linking documents to specific pipe segments. And you had talked a little bit about that, but maybe you can go into more detail with the attributes used in Meridian to link that information.
Absolutely. So currently we are not linking any documents to single pipe sections. But
Okay.
if I let me turn on our chilled water. This is fairly recent construction. If I mouse over our chilled water lines, it actually has a project number associated to that. So because when we as-built these and we draw them into our GIS, we try to track what projects they came from. So at least you could go look up the project number. We're not associating a single document with a single pipe at this point. We may do that in the future, but so far there hasn't been the demand to warrant the amount of effort it would take us to go back and add all this. We might start doing it as we go forward with new construction, but we've got, gosh, miles and miles of pipe underground. So we've had a really hard time with getting funding to back and backdate a lot of information to populate old information. But we may start doing it with new information as it comes in. On things, we've done that with pictures so far in a few places, with putting individual pictures on things. But as far as equipment goes, we're not actually currently mapping any equipment in the GIS database inside of buildings. If it involves, say, a pump in the stormwater system or a transformer in the electrical system that's outside, we are tracking those, and we are populating equipment numbers onto those. Once we have the equipment number, then we could pull the records from our FAMIS database and connect those. But we really need the trades group to get more involved with our GIS before we can do that. And so far, they're working inside the FAMIS database, and they're just beginning to adopt Meridian. So I imagine in the next few years we'll get more involved with that, but so far we've done very little with actual equipment tracking.
Okay, thank you. That is very helpful. Yeah. Certainly a lot of equipment to be tracked.
Absolutely. We've got a lot of equipment on campus, and it's on roofs, and we're actually starting to populate what in the past we've called no man's land spaces, which are spaces that don't really belong to a department or to a group. For instance, all of our tunnels belong to utility services, and they're responsible for maintaining them. But anything within the footprint of the building belongs to either facilities management or housing. So then we get into areas like this where we have crawl spaces under all of these dormitory buildings, and we weren't tracking any of those spaces because they weren't part of the tunnels. And this includes things like attics, crawl spaces, other mechanical spaces inside buildings that don't get counted as part of the gross square footage, non-space spaces. We've been working on tracking those, and including utility vaults, so that we can keep track of them and so that we can assign equipment to those spaces in our FAMIS system going forward.
Okay. The no man spaces. So do you mean to say that, like, even if the tunnels go underneath the building footprint, they're no longer the responsibilities of the utilities folks then, but rather of the building?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
So utility services would take responsibility up to the meter or the main connection at the building. These dorm buildings are really interesting because actually there are a couple of main valves and meters inside the crawl space of the building. They're mostly on the on the steam system. So in those cases, utility services would take responsibility for their pipelines inside of those spaces, but not for anything else that was inside that crawl space. It belongs to housing in this case.
Interesting.
It makes it very complicated, say for asbestos abatement. If you're abating, our steam lines had asbestos insulation on them from years back, and we needed to abate the tunnels, and those pipes run through all these crawl spaces. Let me turn on our steam lines. So they actually run through these spaces from building to building, and so it had to be a joint effort to hire a contractor to come in and abate not only the tunnel but the crawl space as well.
Very interesting. Yeah, asbestos is kind of a big deal, though. That's a prompt for collaboration, most certainly. Okay. So moving away from inside of buildings and to the exterior, you had mentioned in your presentation that you had begun initially working quite a bit with grounds. Could you talk a little bit more about how you may have mapped exterior areas and to what degree they've, yeah.
Let me turn our grounds layer back on again. All right, let's actually go over here. We really started sort of in the center of campus. And we still have our cone zone map on. There we go. We've been pretty extensive with this. Let's actually look in this area. So what we did is actually, as we do close out for new projects and we get new landscape plans, we will add those to the grounds layers. As part of that project, we'll update those. And every spring, typically what happens is we'll make a map book. It's an 11 by 17 set of maps. And I'll turn on our grounds, subzones. So this pink boundary, that's one subzone on campus. So it's one subzone per page. And we print those out and give them to the grounds crews. And early in the spring, they'll go out in the field and look for discrepancies while they're doing their spring maintenance. And we'll update. And that's how we built these out initially, is we printed out blank map books. And they sent out a whole bunch of ROTC students that they hired to walk the campus with these books and document plantings on campus. And they did a beautiful job. very detail-oriented. And everything we've gotten back from them has been fantastic. Once we got the hard copy maps back, it took us 3 to 6 months to input all of that data. But now that we have it all in the GIS, it actually typically involves fairly minor changes every year. For instance, they'll go out and say, oh, this is now a mulch bed, or it has bushes in it rather than perennials. And we're wanting to get even more detailed than that. We're working on a plan to actually track what plants were planted in each bed so that if they need replaced, snowplow runs them over, they get dug up for a utility project, or they just don't survive for some other reason, that our grounds crews can know what they planted and track why they need to replace it and figure out, do we want to plant that again or do we want to do something else? That's completely conceptual at this point. I haven't figured out 100% how to do it since we have such variety on campus. But we will be doing something with collecting that information. But the actual bed information, we collected manually, pen and paper, with a whole bunch of students. The trees, on the other hand, those are all GPS. And we invested in a Trimble GPS unit with an antenna and a collector and a laser rangefinder. And our grounds guys go out in the fields, and they usually do this whenever they're not really busy with other things. We have 3 arborists on campus. And they got started, and they did a few trees on East Campus. And then we heard that the emerald ash borer was expected to come to Colorado. And so we spent a lot of effort documenting all of the ash trees as quickly as possible. And we're collecting the genus and species, the height, the spread, the diameter breast height, condition, and any other notable information on every tree on campus. And so far we've been updating those slowly. We have a meeting every few months and we sit down and look at one area or another on campus and just check that trees look like they're where they're supposed to be. Someone didn't shoot something 2 or 3 times, which we've had happen. But the emerald ash borer really kicked that off. And at this point, we're coming up on about 4,000 trees in our database. We think we have about 5,000.
That's fantastic. Okay. And then you're just addressing those as you go across the different zones with the teams.
Yep.
Okay. That's great. Okay, well, we do have a few more questions that I don't think we'll be able to get to today, but Elizabeth's contact information is available on the CFTA website. I think a good question to wrap up with, though, is one addressing return on investment. So prior to implementing GIS at your university, and as well moving forward as you show these results and have these results, how do you need to or not need to demonstrate a return on investment, and what kind of data do you share with certain parties to move forward?
I think Grounds is a pretty good example of this. Is they've actually put a lot of money into our system so far, and they actually spend a lot of money with us every year to spend time updating these databases, making maps, organizing student efforts to go out and document, and also just data QA, QC, that kind of stuff. So they have made a big investment in our database. I think this has been really important for them. I can't put a specific number value on it, but we do get a lot of grant money for doing turf reduction since we are in a semi-arid climate. So we get grant money based on the percentage of turf that we remove and replace with desert-friendly plantings and things like that. So in order to track how much turf we had and what the percent of reduction is, we needed to figure out how much turf we really had on campus. And then if we, say, replaced all these little areas around this field actually used to be turf also. So if we replaced those with bushes and shrubs, or with gravel beds or mulch, what percentage are we getting?